Hi, everyone. I'm Justin Lynch. Welcome to this Google Hangout on President Obama's Better Broadband speech. I'm the social media coordinator here at New America. I'm joined by Danielle Keel. Hello, Danielle.
Hi. How are you doing?
Good. Did I say the name right?
It's actually pronounced like the vegetable kale, but you know.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So
next time.
Danielle is a policy analyst here at the Open Technology Institute. And we're also joined by Joshua Stager, who is new to OTI and is a policy counsel. Welcome, Josh.
Hi.
Okay, so let's start off with the first question. What did the president just say in his speech? Hi, everyone. I'm Justin Lynch. Welcome to this Google Hangout on President Obama's Better Broadband speech. I'm the coordinator here at New America. I'm joined by Danielle Keel. Hello, Danielle. Okay, so we're having some...
How are you doing?
Yeah, did I say the name right?
It's actually pronounced like the vegetable kale, but you know.
Okay. Okay, so we're having some tech problems, everyone. I think we've got it covered now. So, so this is just a reminder to everyone that you can tweet in, and we'll be answering your questions. Use the hashtag #BetterBroadband. Josh, why don't you start off? What did the president just say in his speech?
So President Obama made a pretty important announcement promoting the use of community broadband. He went to Cedar Falls, Iowa, which is a city that has gigabit service faster than most other cities in the United States. And this is largely because the community of Cedar Falls decided to build its own broadband infrastructure rather than going through a private provider that most people get their internet from, such as a Comcast, Time Warner cable kind of service.
Okay. And so when you're talking about this community internet and this high-speed service, why is this so important? I mean, this is a core tenet of what OTI does. Can you explain more about that, Danielle? Sure.
So one of the big things that we look into at the Open Technology Institute is the broadband access for users all around the United States. And so what we're looking at is a variety of issues, which includes what your internet costs, how fast it is, whether or not you have options to switch internet providers if you don't like your service, if you're not getting what you need, and a variety of other factors that go into questions about broadband adoption, which is whether people can access the internet, and broadband use, so what they actually do with it. And one of the big things that we've done every year for about 3 years is we have done a study called the Cost of Connectivity, where we do a survey of broadband price and speed around the world. We look at 24 cities in the United States and in Europe and Asia, and we look at what it costs consumers to purchase residential broadband packages. And the results are pretty interesting. So what we find overall is that the U.S. is lagging behind a lot of cities in Asia and a lot of cities in Europe. It's more expensive and speeds are slower. The most interesting cities in the United States, the ones that are doing the best, are not necessarily what you'd expect. It's not New York or Los Angeles or Washington, D.C., it's actually Chattanooga, Tennessee, Lafayette, Louisiana, Bristol, Virginia, and Kansas City, Missouri. And what's unique about those 4 cities is they're places where you have alternative broadband providers beyond your big telecom and cable companies. And Chattanooga and Lafayette and Bristol actually have municipal broadband providers. So they have locally owned community networks. And what they're able to offer their residents are gigabit speeds for reasonable prices, and that puts them on par with cities like Seoul and Hong Kong and Tokyo, which the president actually highlighted in his speech today. And they're doing that. You know, one of the reasons why they're able to do that is because the communities have decided that this is a priority. This is something they want to invest in and make available to their residents. Okay, so I'm really wondering why those other countries, those places like Seoul and Tokyo that you just mentioned and the president mentioned today, what are they doing better than those cities, than those big cities in the U.S. like D.C. and in New York? Josh?
Well, I think the important point to take away here is that the cities that are investing here in the United States in community broadband are largely rural communities that are very underserved by existing broadband providers, which is why they had the incentive to develop their own services. But in many other parts of America, there are options for broadband providers, but for high-speed providers, it's usually only one. So at best throughout the United States, most Americans only have one choice, if that, for a broadband provider. So part of the promise of municipal broadband is that it would actually introduce competition, which is something that's severely lacking in most parts of the broadband market in America, unlike in other countries. So really what the president was saying in his announcement is, you know, if you're one of these many very dissatisfied cable customers trying to look for another provider, rather than go on yet another futile customer service call with your existing provider,
Yeah.
channel that energy and turn it towards City Hall. Call them and ask them why they're not building a better alternative for you.
Okay, so those are some of the steps that you can take at the local level. But what are some of the things that the federal government can do to give us better access to the internet and faster access to? What are the steps that Obama is proposing to take here?
I can start with a couple things that he mentioned, and then I'll hand it off to Josh. But so part of what he talked about is encouraging investment, is opening up some federal funding to help promote these initiatives, and giving a greater platform to highlight it to highlight this option. So there are a lot of cities and local communities in the United States that have already built broadband networks, but there are lots more that could. So one of the interesting things that President Obama highlighted is the Next Century Cities Coalition, which is a coalition that is, basically it was launched last year, and the entire goal of it is to talk about what cities are doing to prepare themselves for the next century and to, invest in municipal broadband access, which comes not just with, doesn't just, give people the ability to watch Netflix or play video games online, but it's also critical for online education, for schools, for other, city buildings. And so part of what he's talking about, what he talked about today, was sort of federal efforts to bring greater attention to this issue, to make it easier. And then what he also talked about was a legal issue around municipal broadband networks, which I'm gonna hand off to Josh to talk about.
Sure. Well, so first, just to echo Danielle's point, I think it's very important that the president just first raise the profile of this issue to help other communities realize that they can do this, that they can provide a solution. Many cities aren't equipped with the tools and to even know how to do this, let alone with the funding. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, in many states, even if they are empowered and do have the motivation to build their own networks, they are prevented from doing so by state laws that either prohibit or restrict their ability to do so. Now, unfortunately, these laws largely didn't exist in state legislatures a decade ago. But what happened was, when cities started experimenting with this and they saw it was very successful, some of the incumbent providers realized, uh-oh, this is competition. We can't have that. So they've gone into roughly 19 or 20, depending on how you define it, states to get them to enact restrictions so that municipalities cannot build these networks. This ranges from places like Texas, that has a flat-out ban that tells municipalities, even if you want to build these networks, you can't. Or in other places like North Carolina and Tennessee, where they impose more onerous restrictions that act as de facto bans. And then there are states like Colorado and Minnesota, which require voters to approve the use of these types of projects before the municipality can proceed.
Okay.
The point of all of these laws is to restrict competition and to protect the incumbent carriers. So what the president was trying to do today was to really talk to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and tell them to intervene to get rid of some of these barriers, to empower local communities so that they can go forward with these projects if they want to.
Okay, so we've got some great questions coming in on Twitter. This is a reminder, use hashtag #BetterBroadband. We've got a question from John Curtis Smith, which we're going to get to in a second. But I want to follow up on that, Josh. And I'm wondering, Danielle, you can jump in on this too. What are some of the political dynamics that are happening here? Because we were talking a bit before, and it was really fascinating what was going on. Josh, why don't you start off with this debate
Sure. So, the dynamics here are pretty unique. We have really a debate going on at all three levels of government. You have at the local level, municipalities trying to build these networks or having an interest in it. And then you have now the federal government, led by the White House and the Federal Communications Commission, also trying to incentivize this. But in the middle, you've got the states who are blocking local rights. So there's a very interesting interplay happening here where you do have a lot of federal actors trying to support this work, but then there are also some people at the federal level who are trying to support the state legislature and their efforts to control the municipalities.
Okay. Danielle, anything to add there?
I think Josh covered it pretty well. I think the hope and what President Obama was talking about today is that the end goal here is something that everyone can support, right? I think better broadband access, faster speeds, lower prices. That's good for all Americans. That's good for the American economy. So the idea here is that we should be moving the debate beyond this and actually really talking about what are the kinds of solutions that we need and how do we, how do local communities and how do individuals in the United States basically find ways to solve the broadband access problem and to attack the digital divide. And part of the point that he was also making that's really important is that a large percentage of Americans today have access to what the FCC currently defines as broadband, so 4 megabits per second. But the numbers start to look worse and worse as the speeds get higher. And as we're talking about the future and we're talking about emerging technologies, we're talking about online education, we're talking about all of the fantastic, innovative things that people want to be able to do with the internet, they're going to need better access, and it starts to look worse the faster, when you talk about higher speeds. It's more expensive, there is less access, there's a lot of old networks that don't actually meet those needs. And so the idea here is thinking about the future, how do we solve this problem? And that, that end goal is something that I think is shared among a lot of people. So I think the good thing about today and the optimistic note is that we're actually moving in a really positive direction.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. So this is a reminder, we're answering your questions on Twitter. Use hashtag #BetterBroadband, and Josh and Danielle will be answering them. We've got a question from John Curtis Smith. He asks, how important is it for small cities to be globally engaged on this issue? So maybe, Danielle, this is one of the things that you covered in your cost of connectivity report. What are some of the economic factors and some of the boosts that cities that are more engaged feel with faster internet?
So I think, President Obama mentioned it today in his speech. He talked about Chattanooga and about how the investment in the network comes with additional opportunities. It creates interest from local businesses and from new businesses to move to an area, and that's an issue that the reverse is something that's being discussed in New York City, which is trying to attract a lot of tech talent and startups, and is struggling with broadband access, especially when you get outside of Manhattan, when you go to other boroughs in New York, because the infrastructure really just isn't there in a lot of those places, and that is a huge barrier. If you have a startup, you need a high-speed internet connection, and you need to be in an area that will offer that for you, and that's going to actually affect, that's going to affect a lot of decisions. For smaller cities, I think part of the point is that there are a lot of lessons to be learned from what's happening elsewhere in the United States and around the world. And we've done some research on municipal broadband options and what are the different types of models. There's no one-size-fits-all solution here, right? So the idea isn't that there is one model that any city could look to, and then that would really be the answer to all of their problems. The idea is that there are a variety of different ways, depending on where you are, depending on the local and state regulations, and depending on all kinds of other factors. And so being able to be engaged with other cities in the country and around the world is very critical, because lessons learned are always really important. This also is an issue that's going to continue to evolve, and so continuing to have a dialogue and not just sort of a one-time conversation is really important.
Okay.
From the perspective of small-town America, this is also not just about getting faster speeds or competition. What we're hearing from a lot of mayors in rural America that have invested in this technology is that having a true high-speed network in their town has been critical for stemming the brain drain that so many towns in rural America have been experiencing. So you can now have a startup culture in places like Chattanooga, where people previously, young folks who wanted to get into the tech sector, would try to go to some place like Silicon Valley or New York, and now increasingly feel that they can stay in other parts of the country and do their businesses without having to leave for other cities.
Yeah. So I'm really wondering, besides competition, which is really important, do communities build these kind of broadband networks for other reasons, and what are the other benefits that they get out of building these networks? Danielle, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, plenty to say. I think so. In addition to just the ability to be another service provider, there's a lot of unique things that a city can offer one of which we sort of touched on earlier, which is that you can build a network that meets residential needs, but also the needs of the city and the institutions within it. And so there are a lot of interesting examples of cities in the U.S. that have built networks and then look to find ways to provide world-class internet to their schools and libraries, and to their municipal buildings that have leveraged the municipal network to then offer free Wi-Fi in a lot of public spaces. That's something that you can do when you are planning for not just how do you get more customers for your network, which is sort of a business approach, and it's not to knock that, because that also has led to a lot of broadband investment, but how do you actually meet the needs of the community as a whole? It's not just about signing up more people in their homes, but also about figuring everything else out. And we have a big push right now going on in the U.S., and the president has highlighted this as well, to improve broadband connectivity in schools and libraries. And municipal networks and locally owned networks are a tremendous option for schools and libraries that are trying to create digital learning environments. So there's definitely a lot of other things that come along, a lot of other positive community benefits that come along with municipal investment. Other ones to highlight are things like public safety and, as we talk about, smart cities and all that kind of stuff.
And I know that OTI does a lot of work with public libraries and granting internet access, giving them more access. Can you talk more about the work that you do in those communities and where those communities are?
Sure. So we do a lot of work with community anchor institutions around building, local networks in Philadelphia and in Detroit. We also are a partner on some projects that are being developed in New York, the New York Public Library. But more than just the work that we do, and we are interested in talking with them about digital literacy and broadband adoption. But libraries overall in the United States are sort of undergoing this transformation right now. So they're not just the place where you go to take out books or maybe DVDs. Libraries are turning themselves into these high-tech 21st century information hubs. So they're places where people go to get internet access, people who don't have it at home, students after school, and they're turning into places where people go to learn how to code, where a lot of libraries are building maker spaces, so places where people can experiment with new technologies, experiment with 3D printers, and they're not just they're not just updating themselves for the 21st century. They're reinventing themselves to be kind of leadership places. And they're also this kinds of experiments we're seeing with, like, in New York. The library is talking about the way you can go check out a book. You can go check out the internet. You can check out a MiFi device that allows you to take it. You can take it home and basically access the internet. And it's what it does. It's twofold. It serves the members of the community that don't have internet access at home for when the library closes, they can actually check it out. And it's a broadband adoption experiment, because one of the barriers, there are a lot of barriers to adoption in the United States. One of them is cost, but another one is relevance, people who aren't actually sure what the internet will do for them. And so giving them an opportunity to try it out for themselves can show them that it's relevant and that it's actually something they want to do. They'll realize that they could use it to look for jobs or to take an online course or to do anything that might be really beneficial for them.
Yeah. We've got one more question on Twitter, and this will be the last question. Do you think multinational groups like the at ITU and the G20 could help, or should it be in the U.S. only? So, Josh, what is the role of the international community when we're talking about greater broadband access?
I'll pass this off to Danielle. I'm sure she has some thoughts here.
I mean, thanks, Josh. I think as far as broadband adoption is concerned, that is a universal goal. That's not just a U.S. goal, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned. Most broadband policy is national or local, and talking about doing global internet regulations or global broadband policies is very, very tricky. And that's maybe something for another subject for another discussion, as there's a lot we could say about that. But what is something that is worth highlighting is that groups like the ITU and other international groups are actually talking about broadband access challenges in the developing world, and the ITU in particular does a lot of development work in Africa and in parts of Asia, And there's a lot of value in those programs. They're helping in areas where governments may not be able to supplement and where you may not have private sector investment. And so that's very important work. And when we were talking about lessons learned earlier, there are lessons that we in the United States can learn from developing countries, and as they face their broadband access challenges, sometimes we are sort of at a disadvantage because the United States was such an early adopter for internet access. So we are not looking at things creatively sometimes the way you might see them in sub-Saharan Africa or in Tunisia or someplace like that. So there's definitely a lot of cross-pollination to be had, and I think you will also see a lot of people in other countries very encouraged by President Obama's speech today, and excited that we are sort of taking a strong stand right now in the United States for better broadband policies and kind of asserting that leadership.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. We really appreciate it. Be sure to check out the Cost of Connectivity report that's on the New America website. It's newamerica.org. Be sure to follow us at New America, and be sure to tune in to the next Hangout. Thanks for joining us, Danielle, and Josh, too.
Thanks.
Thanks.